You sit awaiting with concern. They give you hope, and then they try to bury you. On 22nd of April 2011, the long-awaited findings for the FBI were published. Regardless of the obvious bias in the police evidence, if this favours self-infliction, we would have no way back. There can be no illusion on the difficulty there was in reading this report in an effort to finally get to those words, which effectively stated this was a neutral verdict. As part of the final findings, the sheriff points out that no evidence has been presented that points to Candace Bonner's guilt, and she should therefore maintain a position of presumed innocence. With regards Colin, the sheriff raises his concern that there being no compelling evidence that Colin intended to kill himself, and considering the degree of force required, the nature of the injury is inconsistent with a dramatic gesture. It is also worth noting that the sheriff uses Professor Green's testimony on various points throughout, and must seriously consider what the outcome would have been had the Crown succeeded in preventing the Professor being a witness. We know that for many, they would see this as the end, but for us it was a new beginning. We had fought tirelessly to show that Colin did not do this, and even with the most vigorous attempts by Fife police to frame Colin, they had failed. There was no material evidence to support the idea of suicide. While Colin's family would push on with demands for further independent investigations, the sheriff's closing remarks to Colin's father would be one used against them by the Crown. This statement that there was little that could be done was outside his remit. Furthermore, it is contradictory to his own comments regarding the evidence at the FBI. It may appear to be reasonable that the sheriff believes that the investigation is thorough and impartial, but that is only because this was not an area for consideration within the FBI. If this was a criminal case, we would have had the right to attack the investigation. As has been laid out in the previous videos, our entire concerns centred on the Fife investigation and the actions of fiscal and police. This latter point is clearly in alignment with the sheriff stating that the FBI was not the place to examine the investigation. The fundamental basis of a push for a new independent investigation would be entirely based upon the corrupt nature of Fife Police's handling of Colin's case. In highlighting, thus we also called out some of the issues from the FBI. Some of these were repeats of issues raised previously, but others questioned how can it be that in a so-called thorough investigation that we did not know the location of the knife, or that the uncle was at the scene at a problematic time, the bias in information shared to psychologists, the fact that door-to-door inquiries did not take place, and our family had to listen to an SIO who was openly hostile towards Colin and his family. On the 30th of May 2011, we had a meeting with the Fiscal's Office and their QC representative from the FBI to review the Sheriff's findings. We used this meeting to bring up the concerns we had from the FBI and the investigation. We were concerned that there was no interest, again, in anything we raised. This was another tick box exercise. However, it was even more disconcerting that the QC had said he had no memory of statements talking of Candace assaulting Colin. We'd been repeatedly informed that Crown Counsel review all evidence. How can this be? We actually received the minutes for this meeting about 4 months after the meeting took place, and we saw that most of the contentious issues were either omitted or written up somewhat differently from what was actually stated. We were sure of what was said as we had recorded the meeting. We marked up the minutes with amendments and sent them back to the Fiscal. If we are truly going to assess the behaviour and expectations from Police and Crown Office towards Colin, we should look at the key findings from the Hillsborough inquiry and their thoughts on state institutions' behaviour when they have made serious errors. Among the many findings from Hillsborough, 4 key issues are called out: demonising the dead, institutional defensiveness, resisting proper disclosure, and equality of arms. We will look at these in a bit more detail. If the authorities can focus all the attention on Colin, it deflects from their obvious odious behaviour. We witnessed this through the continuous attack on Colin. Even at the FBI, we have the SIO falsely representing witness statements without a hint of correction from the Crown. We have been met with institutional defensiveness time and again, and as will be seen, it is never removed. We have had open letters of apology, only after they are dragged screaming to accept their failings. The acceptance of failure is always at the lowest level that they can administer, and always too late to prevent the next cover-up. In our case, we saw that letters between Dundee Pathology and Fiscal were withheld, non-disclosure of police storm records, police officer statements about their witness statements, actual phone records, etc. These are all key to establishing what was known and thus allow us to identify key individuals and to ask pertinent questions. Even as late as 2016, we were in receipt of new information that yielded important data and that had never been shared. An important aspect of law in cases of conflict is the principle of equality of arms. This means that each body represented should have the same level of representation. This was not the case. We had the support of a single solicitor against QCs and supporting teams. The late agreement to that support also impacts the time available to truly do a deep dive into the investigation, and this is why a number of our issues could not be dealt with at the FAI, but came to light thereafter. With our developed understanding of just how bad things had been, and armed with copious levels of evidence, we pushed for a new investigation. On the 13th of June 2011, MSPs Willie Rennie and John Park wrote on our behalf to the Justice Secretary. They highlighted the inconclusive outcome of the FAI and asked for an independent investigation to be run by Strathclyde. That very same day, the apartment head of Dundee Pathology sent copies of the letters between the fiscal and pathologists that had been held back from the FAI. When we eventually saw the letters, as shown in Vlog 2, it greatly angered us and drove us with greater conviction that things had to change. Our next opportunity to push was when we had a meeting at the Crown Office on the 5th of July 2011, and again we raised the exact same issues regarding the investigation bias. The responses were just rationalising away our concerns, also stating that we could have called whoever we wanted as a witness. This was nonsense, as Colin's mother reiterated. Over the next few days after our meeting on July the 5th, we sent a number of emails to the Crown Office, highlighting in more detail the issues with the investigation. We not only talked about the psychological autopsy, the SIO at the FAI, summaries not reflecting reality, Candace going to Australia, May 2008 interview, obviously a formality, missing statement of detective, blood on the ceiling. We also provided greater detail and gave names of appropriate witnesses. If nothing else, there would be no deniability. We had already been refused a fresh, independent investigation by the Chief Constable of Fife Police, and now on the 9th of August 2011, the Justice Secretary gave his response to Willie Rennie and John Park. After saying that he could not order a fresh investigation, he was now saying he could not meet with Colin's family. He stated that if we were not happy, we should use the relative complaints procedure like Police Complaints Commissioner for Scotland. We did go to the Police Complaints Commissioner, and later we went to Police Investigation and Review Commissioner. This is something we will cover after we get past the Strathclyde investigation. On the 31st of August 2011, John Park MSP now wrote to the Lord Advocate outlining our concerns and the need for independence in the investigation. On 7th of September 2011, we were informed by the Crown Office that there will be an independent review of Colin's case by a retired ex-senior detective. Of course we were pleased. The incessant public pressure appeared to be helping. But to avoid any doubts about where this goes, this is another massive stitch-up, but we'll go through this in some detail. The first meeting with this ex-senior CID officer took place on the 20th of September 2011. We received his view of what our key themes of concern were, and they were clearly a view from others and not ours. We were informed that he had full access to files and emails. We shared numerous documents that focused on our concerns, and we subsequently sent updates to his view of our key themes. Over the intervening weeks, we had exchanged letters and we were developing concern in aspects of this review. He was talking of the minutes of meetings, but we had no clarification if it was original minutes or corrected updated minutes. We informed him that we could prove what was said and raised again the concern over QC not being aware of statements talking of violence to Colin. We subsequently sent this extract from the recording to him. The fact that we were able to highlight that we could prove what was said definitely seemed to fluster this detective.
Here's the thing,
that's concerning us, the more we think about it, David, is we sent those versions of the minutes back, which are, might not be 100% what's recorded, but it is verbatim. Not one person asked us about them, including you. Now, we brought up these minutes time and again about the fact that they're not valid as the Fiscal's office is not valid as a reasonable representation of those meetings. And now we sent a version back. Not one person's quizzed us about them. Not one person's contradicted them. Not one person's said it's good or bad.
I think what I was until now, right? Until now, my involvement with that was between you and the Crown.
On 9th of January, a letter was sent by the reviewing officer. While saying the excerpt was sent was interesting, he asked we sent all recordings to him. Our problem with lack of trust was significant, and we never did. The problem we had was that he never once acknowledged the other version of minutes we had sent, nor state any concern that the significant piece we shared was missing from the appropriate set of minutes. His take on minute taking would prove interesting in his final analysis. On the 28th of June 2012, we had a meeting with the reviewing officer, where he gave each of us a copy of his executive summary. His opening comments really informed us how this would play out. From the minute we sat down, it was clear that there would be no discussions on his findings, and that in essence Fife Police were happy with his report. What else really needs said? When we received the minutes, as normal, we see comments missing. So we sent an email with these, and while the email was acknowledged, no updated minutes were ever published. We had discussed the early attendance of Candace's family member and lack of door-to-door inquiries, the latter being a basic requirement of the serious crime protocols. No surprise, it also seemed to be missed on his summary. We took a great deal of effort in reviewing the 104 findings within this report, and felt we were equipped to comment on 81 of these. Of those, we took exception to 45 findings. We will now look at a few of these findings. In looking at these findings, it's important to remember that this independent reviewer had access to all the documentation we had. He stated that the area fiscal may have been affected by a bias towards self-infliction, and does not discuss the same area fiscal, talking of seeing nothing like this in his 36 years, and ordering an investigation. No comment on why no investigation takes place. A theme that comes up on a few occasions is about organisational risk. It seems strange to be concerned that a family may know police procedure, rather than being comfortable that if you do your job right, there can be no problem. And for the record, we did not have a copy of the murder investigation manual. Reviews are easy when you can just make things up. We see that the reviewing officer gives a clean bill of health to the interviews, but this flies in the face of the facts, and at least Tony Whittle could talk to some of that detail.
And then you'd say, well, you said in your first statement, when you got there, he was absolutely fine. In your second statement, you say, he seemed a bit down. And in your third interview, suddenly, he's suicidal. Now, Candice, come on now. And that kind of questioning should have taken place, but it didn't. And you would go through each topic, because you've captured her accounts, you can't change that. And you would challenge and say, what you've said is not consistent with this and this, and this. What's your explanation to that? None of that was done. Now, that is such basic principle investigative techniques that any detective inspector would know what they are and didn't do it. And I think that was a choice not to do it rather than lack of knowledge of how to do it.
The psychological autopsy is discussed as a non-issue, rather than a focus of the impact on a Crown-instructed pathologist. It is stated this was a forensic pathologist commissioned by the family. We had commissioned no pathologist, and any fees they received were from the Crown Office.
Right at the outset, I told Stuart that I would do this on a pro bono basis.
One thing this review does is cast subtle digs at those believed to have been paid by us. People like Professor Green, Professor Busuttil, Tony Whittle and others have been helping purely out the goodness of their heart. It's unfortunate that these attempts to muddy the waters is done by those that should have greater integrity. This is another fascinating topic for the independent reviewer to choose to have a dig at us. He praises the minutes, and yet he must have seen the documents apologising for late and incomplete minutes. If this individual believes that minutes are valuable, he must recognise poor tardy minutes are below worthless. Minutes are critical in establishing a record of a meeting. To have minutes that don't facilitate the accurate view of a family permits false accounting and bias in representation. As we have stated to this individual, if all minutes are agreed and timely, a recording can only help accuracy. The independent reviewer also talks highly of the timelines, but fails to note that key individuals are missing from this timeline. Surely with his experience, he would have looked for them. Or does he just look at lots of boxes? It is not only what is wrongly commented on that is a concern, it is what is not stated. This is information he had access to, but makes no comment. This will not be the last time these points are hidden. How do we stop this highly reputable individual's troublesome report being a barrier to moving forward?